This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
I know the listeners of the show consume all kinds of true crime media. If you enjoy talking about true crime podcasts and want to know what shows people are enjoying, consider joining two of the larger true crime Facebook groups, True Crime Podcasts and True Crime Podcasts and Documentaries We Love. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. If you haven't, go back and listen to episode 11, which is part 1 of this case. You're listening to episode 12, The Murder of Jennifer Cave, part 2 of 2. The police were careful to go through all the proper channels to get a search warrant and went through Colton's apartment. The kitchen sparkled and was in direct contrast to the rooms that were in disarray. They had wiped the kitchen down, but Colton did not run the dishwasher, which contained a machete entwined with hair and blood. They found a knife, which had blood on the blade, and was engraved with the proud family business tagline of Brandt, the most trusted name in farm implements since 1913, a division of Petoniak Machinery Corporation. There were 2 bullet cartridges in the couch by Colton's living room. Detectives found a receipt with items purchased from a hardware store. They went to the hardware store to track down the surveillance footage, which showed Colton at the checkout. The manager at the hardware store watched the video with the detectives and easily remembered the kid who looked stoned, smelled like booze, and who intended to cut up a frozen turkey with a hacksaw. They found a receipt from Burger King, dated on the day Jennifer disappeared. It was a meal for $6.16, Coke, fries, and a burger with no onions. The prosecutor was very interested in this receipt. How removed from emotion would someone have to be to buy tools at a hardware store to cut up their friend, then go to Burger King and order something to eat? The crime scene crew removed Jennifer's body from the bathtub. Her head and hands were in a trash bag on the floor. A hacksaw rested on her body. There was a 3rd bullet casing found by the body, but they never found where the bullet went. An autopsy determined that the fatal wound was a bullet that entered her ribs, went through the lower lung, and cut into the aorta, which is the body's largest artery, and she probably died within seconds. But then, there were some disturbing and unanticipated findings. There were 18 stab wounds on her neck and face, which were inflicted post-mortem. There were wounds on her arms, thighs, and chest. When the pathologist did an x-ray, he saw a bullet inside the skull by her left temple. The doctor could not find the entry point for this wound and came to the unsettling conclusion that someone fired the bullet up through the neck after the head was removed. There was no explanation for all these after-death wounds. One can only assume that someone did this for personal entertainment or morbid enjoyment. During the autopsy, they ran a fingerprint check, and the prints from the body matched those that were filed with Jennifer Cave's Texas driver's license records. Now that they had positively confirmed that this was Jennifer, Jim and Sharon had to call the family and let everyone know Jennifer was dead. They wanted to tell Lauren in person because she was so close with her sister. Lauren's parents flew her in and told her that there had been an accident. Jennifer had passed away. Lauren wanted more details, so Jim told her that someone had killed her. Lauren hurried to the trash can and threw up. The hunt for Colton was underway. He had an advantage of having a 2-day head start on authorities. The police got Colton's phone records, and after he got off the phone with Sharon, he immediately ran. His phone showed he was traveling through Texas, but police weren't sure what car they were looking for since he left his Toyota in the parking garage. Austin PD realized they couldn't find Colton without help and called in the FBI and U.S. Marshals. They released a wanted poster for Colton Petoniak, which showed his picture and his physical stats. It stated that he was armed and dangerous and should be approached with caution. Texas police started processing Colton's Toyota Avalon. In 2005, people still kept road maps in their vehicles, and police were lucky enough to find a road atlas that had pages torn out. The missing maps were ones that showed routes from Austin to Mexico. They found a .380 Smith & Wesson with bullets in the magazine in the center console of the car. The serial number of the gun was partially scratched off, but the shell casings from the gun matched the ones found in Colton's apartment. Once everything was settled in Austin, Jim and Sharon went back to Corpus Christi. Sharon walked through the front door of her home and slid right into bed. Their family doctor stopped by with tranquilizers and sleeping pills. Sharon slept, and when she finally woke up, their church pastor was praying at her bedside. Jim was the rock and held everyone together, but he had witnessed something that no one should ever have seen, let alone a father. A brutal image of his mutilated stepdaughter was burned into his memory. Austin PD asked him to keep that information to himself until they arrested Colton, but he needed to talk to someone. Jim called the one friend that he could trust and would understand, private investigator Sidney Smith. Jim went to Sid's home and told him everything. Jim cried. What could you possibly tell someone that had experienced such a traumatic event? The only thing that Sid could do was listen and try to comfort his friend. Jim could take a small amount of solace that their call to Colton interrupted his plan. He would have finished dismembering Jennifer and dumped her body where no one would have ever found it. Sid wondered why Austin PD couldn't have found a legal justification to enter Colton's apartment so they could have spared Jim. Sidney Smith was a great friend to the family. He handled all the press and was also the contact person with Austin PD. In Corpus Christi, the Seaside Funeral Home had a visitation for Jennifer Cave. It was a closed casket. Sharon was not aware of all the gruesome details that happened to Jennifer after she died. Sharon wanted to see her daughter one last time. Jim reminded and reassured her that she couldn't see Jennifer. He offered no explanations, and she needed to trust him. The viewing line was massive. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to Jennifer Cave. Sid Smith got Jim's attention and had to tell him something very important. After their chat, Jim had the funeral director close the doors to all the friends that were in the viewing line. He told everyone that they had to leave, and this was for immediate family only. He was so sorry. Jim said that the media found the arrest warrant, and they were getting access to Jennifer's autopsy. Jim wanted everyone in the family to hear it from him. He explained that Jennifer was shot and had died quickly. However, after death, her body was mutilated, and someone had cut her head and hands off. That night, the family doctor came over to the house and medicated both Sharon and Vanessa. As the Sedgwick and Cave families grieved, the Petoniaks were busy. Even though he did not know where Colton was, Eddie Petoniak searched for a good lawyer for his son. He used the same lawyer who got Colton out of his felony drug charge. The lawyer tried to call Colton's cell phone, and it went straight to voicemail. Laura and Colton had a friend named Saeed Aziz, who also attended UT. When he found out that Jennifer had been murdered and Colton was on the run, Saeed dialed Austin PD. He told them that if they were looking for Colton Petoniak, he was probably with a girl named Laura Ashley Hall. Meanwhile, south of the border, Laura and Colton arrived at the Casablanca Inn in Piedras Negras, Mexico. A man named Pedro Fernandez checked them in. On the second night of their stay at the Casablanca Inn, Pedro was working again, and he had plans to watch the UFC pay-per-view fight on his satellite TV. Colton overheard Pedro mention the fights and wanted to know if there was a bar where he could watch it. Pedro couldn't think of any place that was showing the event. Colton asked if Pedro could record it for him so he could watch it later. Pedro thought about it for a moment, then invited Colton to his home to watch the fights. After all, he looked like a harmless college kid on vacation. Laura, Colton, and Pedro jumped in a cab and picked up some beer on the way to Pedro's house. Much of the talk early in the evening was about mixed martial arts. Welterweight George St. Pierre made quick work of Frank Trigg with a rear naked choke in round 1. Pedro thought to himself that these American folks were nice. For the last fight of the night, Chuck Liddell TKO'd Jeremy Horn in the 4th round to defend his light heavyweight belt. By that time, Colton consumed a good amount of alcohol and was drunk. Pedro amassed that Colton started drinking before he arrived at his house. Colton asked if Pedro could help them sell the caddy because they needed money. Pedro told them that they would have to get the title before they could sell it. Mexico did not differ from the United States in that regard. Colton was adamant that they couldn't go back to the United States. Pedro had a strange feeling about this statement. Most Americans who visited Piedras Negras intended to go back home. Pedro himself wanted to go back to the United States, but could not. He had been deported from the U.S. after they charged him with burglary. Colton wanted to know if authorities extradited from Mexico. Pedro was unsure. He also didn't like the road that this conversation had turned down. Maybe he had a lapse in judgment bringing these Americans to his home. Laura told Colton to shut up. She did not want him to share the intimate details of their personal situation. Laura directed their conversation back to selling her Cadillac. Pedro said he might have the papers they would need to file to get their title. He got up and walked to his office. Colton got up uninvited and followed Pedro. A switch had flipped in Colton, and now he told Pedro that he could take him. Colton pulled up his shirt and revealed a knife that was attached to his belt. Pedro felt threatened and walked back out to the living room. He needed these people out of his house. He told Colton and Laura that he dropped them off at a bar, since the fights were over, and they could continue their evening there. Colton was so inebriated that he fell into a bunch of toys in Pedro's kids' play area. Laura got into the play area with Colton, and Pedro snapped a picture of them because he wanted to have a physical record of these shady hotel guests. If you go to Google Images and type Colton Petoniak, Pedro Fernandez, you will see a picture of Colton and Laura, oblivious to the world, and smiling for the camera as if they're on a summer vacation. Colton has a Mickey Mouse stuffed animal sitting on his lap. And like the true gangster that he always wanted to be, he's pinching Mickey's mouth shut, cutting off the stuffed animal's airway. Later on, Colton instant messaged his Orange Tree condo neighbor, Nora Sullivan. All Colton said was, "What's up?" She was away from her computer at the time and never responded. Nora called Austin PD because she knew that all the police business at their condo wasn't a drug-related thing. She heard Jennifer was dead and Colton was missing. And Nora genuinely liked Jennifer. Nora told the police about the night of the murder, when Colton came over to her apartment at 3 a.m. with blood on him. She told them about the crazy story Colton told about a gunfight with drug dealers. She assumed he made the whole thing up. Because of the decomposition of Jennifer's body, the pathologist could not nail down an exact time of death, and only had estimated the day. The information that Nora had was inconsequential to her, but it helped the police pinpoint the time of Jennifer's death. Laura's father, Lauren Hall, called the Austin Police Department. His daughter had emailed him and asked him to move all her stuff out of her apartment. It worried Lauren Hall that his daughter might be with Colton. When the police ran a check on Laura Ashley Hall, they found she received a ticket for traveling at an unsafe speed with an expired state tax sticker just north of Del Rio, Texas, on the night Colton disappeared. The U.S. Marshals found a video of Hall driving her Cadillac over the border at 2:36 in the morning. Her father called APD a second time, and he thought his daughter was contacting him from a hotel in Mexico. The U.S. Marshals sent the local Mexican police a picture from Colton's wanted poster and the driver's license photo of Laura Hall with a description of her car. They knew that the capture of the fugitives was certain when they found Laura Hall's Cadillac at the Casablanca Inn. When they scanned the building, they saw a man and woman smoking on a second-floor balcony. Droves of Mexican police entered the hotel and went to the second-floor room. They immediately took Colton and put him in handcuffs. Laura protested, much like the lawyer that she wanted to be. They were American citizens, damn it. Their civil rights were being violated. How dare they be arrested? After 5 days in Mexico, Laura and Colton's excursion came to an abrupt end. They had no legal status in Mexico and were considered illegal immigrants, so they were expatriated to the United States. Once Colton arrived in Texas, police read him his rights. When he was being charged, he said if this was about a murder, he knew what this was about. Colton also said that he screwed up. Laura Hall was released, and her father picked her up. She was not charged with any crimes. Laura and her dad drove back to Mexico to pick up her Cadillac. Jailhouse staff placed Colton on suicide watch because of the significant crimes they charged him with. He immediately asked for a lawyer. Laura called her friend, Syed Aziz, to tell him what had been going on in her life and how they were raided in Mexico. She did not know that he was in contact with the Austin Police Department. He asked Laura how long she had been involved in all this stuff with Colton. She said about 2 hours after it all started. Laura's plan was to tell the police she thought she was going on vacation with Colton and was unaware of the dismemberment that happened in Colton's bathtub. Laura called one of her good friends, Andrea. She told her friend to Google Colton Petoniak, and when Andrea did, she saw the news. She wanted to know why Laura was not in jail. Laura said that they were not going to get her. She did nothing. She was on vacation in Mexico, and that's all she knew. Laura called her friend Syed Aziz again. She was prattling on about how she loved Colton, and she would do anything to help him. Syed reminded her that Colton didn't deserve friends in his corner. Laura told him that Colton said it was an accident, and she would help by sticking up for him. He might even get manslaughter charged instead of murder, or maybe he could even walk free. Syed was stunned by this whole conversation. Laura ended their phone chat by saying that she loved Colton, and that is how she rolls. The whole exchange with Laura over the phone made Syed uneasy. With every word that Laura told him, she was pulling him into the middle of a murder case. He called APD again. This time, they asked him to come down to the station to give an in-person statement. After speaking with Syed, detectives wanted a statement from Laura Hall. She signed something that said she didn't know anything about the murder, and she thought they were on a Mexican vacation. And, in her opinion, Colton was not a deranged person and would not shoot a woman on purpose. APD took possession of Laura's Cadillac and let her go home for the time being. In Mexico, Pedro Fernandez walked to the Border Patrol agent's office and told them that he worked at the Casablanca Inn. He had important information regarding those 2 college kids from Texas who were arrested. Later, they sent someone to take a statement from Pedro, and he detailed all of his experiences with Laura and Colton. The detective wanted Pedro to email him the picture he took of Laura and Colton with Mickey Mouse in the kids' play area of his home. And then the news about Jennifer's death and dismemberment was out. The internet was buzzing with activity. 2 Facebook groups were created. I'm Scared of Colton Petoniak and Laura Hall is Insane. Laura, never being one to take the high road, couldn't help herself and left a message. Hey, face. I just found your cutesy groups. I'm sure you will post this message. You know nothing about me. You know nothing about Colton. And if you're not careful, you're looking for a lawsuit. For the record, I think your smart-ass approach to our legal problems is about the sickest thing I've ever seen anyone do. You disgust me. So tell all your buddies who think he's scary and crazy that I messaged you. Her message was, of course, posted for everyone to see. One of the more poignant responses was, she thinks posting on a website is sick? What is killing a girl and cutting up her body? One day, Laura's Facebook friends logged on and saw the following post from Laura. Colton is innocent. He's the most generous, kindest person who I've ever been blessed to spend time with. There is no way he is anything but innocent. If anyone has anything to say to the contrary, I dare you to say it to me. Her status was, in a relationship. Location said, deported. And under summer plans it said, police ruined my summer. It was right around that time when she got a tattoo on her ankle that said Colton. APD finished processing Laura's car and told her she could pick it up. When she walked into the police station, they had a warrant for her arrest. She was being charged with hindering apprehension, which was a 3rd-degree felony. At first, Laura refused to talk without having a lawyer. She had learned that much from working at a law firm. But then she changed her mind and talked for 9 hours. They asked her about Colton's emotional state and feelings when he talked about killing Jennifer. Hall said that Colton was remorseful. The detective wanted to know if she was trying to protect Colton. Hall said Colton was real upset about it, but she didn't know if it's because he got caught or what this would do to his family.
Laura Ashley Hall, you are under arrest.
Oh my God.
Okay.
What's going to happen?
You're going to go to jail.
What did I...
You got to tell the truth. Okay, now we're back at the apartment.
Yeah.
All right, and this is somewhere around 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Colton let you in.
I sat down. I saw the purse. Saw shoes. Saw shorts. And I was just like, what is this? Like, you invited me, like, over, and there's some other girl here. What is going on? And he had the bathroom door closed, and I was just, like, in the bathroom, like, waiting for me. Like, what is going on? And I was like, who is this? And he goes, shh. He got up, somebody. No, there's not. No, there's not. You don't believe me? Come and see. Okay, sure. Let's see the body in your bathtub. Yeah, right. Opens the shower curtain. There's a body in the bathtub. Puts a machete on top of it. I got the out of the bathroom. Two goals. One, get out of this bathroom. Two, don't let Colton think you're going to call the police.
Did he say what he planned to do with that body?
He said he was going to cut up the body.
Cut up the body and get rid of it. Did you see at any point him doing anything to further that exercise?
No. God, no.
Okay. Did you see any evidence of any preparation for that?
God, no.
Okay. After he told you what he had planned to do with the body,
Yeah.
did he ask you to help him?
No. He told me to get out of there.
Her final message to the detectives was that Colton forced her to help him. There was a body in the bathtub when she arrived at the apartment. They had sex on the couch, but at one point Colton threatened her with a knife and a gun. Detectives pointed out that there were many inconsistencies in her story. She left Colton's place to put gas in her car and then took a nap at her apartment. That would have been a perfect opportunity to call the police, but she didn't do that. When they originally asked Laura why Colton killed Jennifer, she said Jennifer owed him money. But then Laura changed her story and said Colton killed Jennifer because she didn't want to be around him anymore. Even though Laura talked for 9 hours, much to her surprise, she couldn't talk her way out of the charges or the $175,000 bail. She was booked and immediately sent to jail. It wasn't shocking that Laura Ashley Hall didn't mesh with the other women in jail. When she did her initial walk down the hallway to her new cell, the women laughed and mocked her. They called her that serial killer chick. Some inmates ran their hands across their throats in a slitting motion. They sent a clear message that Laura better watch herself. Laura's new cellie was 60-year-old Henrietta Langenbach. She was a white-collar criminal who committed a felony when she was the CFO of a real estate company. Henrietta was also convicted of helping someone get false documents. She was a well-educated and worldly woman who spoke 6 languages. Laura Hall treated her like she had a low IQ and was her inferior. But Laura also thought she was smarter than APD and the whole prosecutor team. Laura bragged that she had ice in her veins and could pass a lie detector test. In jail, Laura talked a lot. It upset her that her father called the police on her, and he didn't bail her out. He also didn't hire her a real lawyer, and instead got her a court-appointed one. Laura wanted her lawyer, Tom Weber, to concoct a story that would get her and Colton off on lesser charges, but Tom wouldn't do that. Henrietta explained to Laura that her attorney would not make up lies to help her, and he also wouldn't put her on the stand if he thought she had difficulties telling the truth. For as much as Laura Hall wanted to be a lawyer and had been working at a law firm, she seemed to live inside of a fantasy. Attorney Tom Weber saw that Laura had no empathy or sympathy for Jennifer Cave or her family. The only thing she cared about was herself and Colton. He wanted her to testify against Colton so he could cut a deal with the prosecutor, but Laura refused. As the weeks wore on, Laura would tell her cellmate that Jennifer Cave wasn't anything. She was a nobody and a waitress hoe, and Colton was brilliant. Laura told Henrietta that Colton and Jennifer argued over money that she owed Colton for drugs. Then he shot her dead that night. When she went over to Colton's house, she did not understand who he shot until he showed her the bathroom. There was only one bathroom in the apartment, and Colton closed the shower curtain to hide the body so Laura could use the toilet. Henrietta asked Laura how she could use the restroom, knowing that there was a dead woman in the tub. Hall said that when someone is very intelligent, they can compartmentalize things. Laura gave her cellie the impression that she took charge after Colton showed her the body, which included Laura crafting the hardware store shopping list. When Laura and Colton went to eat pizza, Sharon Cave called. This flipped Colton out, and they quickly left for Mexico, which was the happiest time in Laura Hall's life. The original plan was to cut off Jennifer's head, hands, and feet and throw them in the lake since those were the most identifiable body parts. They would dump the rest of her body in Mexico. One night, Laura had a bad nightmare and thrashed around on the top bunk of her cell. She fell out of bed and clanged her head on the wall on the way down to the floor. Laura had 2 black eyes and a large lump on her head. Jailhouse staff moved her to another cell where there was an open bottom bunk. That was the last time Henrietta had to endure rooming with Laura Hall. Laura didn't know it, but Henrietta had written notes about all their chats after Laura went to sleep each night. She sent them to her attorney for safekeeping. After they moved Laura, she ended up in solitary confinement for refusing to clean or do her work. She offered other inmates chips or various food items if they would do her laundry. When it came time to pay up, Laura just wouldn't. Laura's good friend Andrea visited her in prison. Laura was still sticking up for Colton and would do everything in her power to help him. Andrea could not understand how Laura could still feel this way. Jennifer Cave was dead because of Colton. At that point, Andrea realized that she could no longer be friends with Laura. That was the last time she went to visit her in jail. Colton's attorney, Sam Bissett, interviewed his client and wanted to know what happened. He said he didn't remember. Colton said Jennifer was his friend and he wouldn't have killed her on purpose. Attorney Bissett wanted to know why Colton didn't immediately call the police after the accident, because he would have a manslaughter case instead of a murder case. Colton didn't know why he didn't call police. Since Colton couldn't remember the shooting, a self-defense argument could not be made. Sam did not like his client's odds. They charged Colton Petoniak with murder on August 23, 2005. Jim could not understand why Colton did not have more charges given the body mutilation. It turned out that mutilating a corpse was only considered a misdemeanor in Texas. 2 months after Jennifer's death, in October 2005, there was a courtroom motion. This would be Sharon's first opportunity to cast an eye upon the person who took her daughter's life. During the holidays that year, Sharon spent most of her time in bed. They did not have a Thanksgiving bird, because the only association that the family could make was that Colton bought a saw to supposedly cut up a turkey. Jim skipped his annual bird hunting trip. He could no longer handle it. In January 2006, Laura Hall's parents posted bail, and they released her from prison. One condition of her bail was that she was not to visit Colton. She moved in with a friend who used to work with her at the law firm. Laura told her friend that she was high when she helped Colton cut off Jennifer's head. Laura would make inappropriate jokes like, "Don't worry, I won't cut off your head." Laura eventually moved into her own apartment, dyed her hair red, started going by her middle name Ashley, and used the last name Holiday. Laura was taking classes at UT and was still planning on graduating. Laura's neighbors were unsettled about the extreme amount of anger that she expressed, and often heard screaming coming from her apartment. Laura was friends with a student who had a drug problem. The man went out with his girlfriend one night instead of doing drugs with Laura. At 4 a.m., Laura shattered glass in the courtyard and shouted that she was going to kill him. Shortly after that incident, the apartment residents figured out who she was. That Mexico chick. The media had been working hard on getting all of Jennifer's details released, and they had her autopsy in their possession. Jennifer's toxicology screen showed she had recreational amounts of alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in her system. Sharon still did not know all the details about her daughter's dismemberment. Jim slowly told her facts on a need-to-know basis. Jim was a strong man and was the glue that held the family together, but he was reeling from what he witnessed in that apartment. Sharon was unpacking items she bought at the grocery store. Jim became emotional when she placed a box of white kitchen-sized garbage bags with red drawstrings on the counter. He told Sharon that she couldn't use those. Sharon didn't understand what was wrong. Jim clarified that those were the kind that Colton had used. Sharon tossed them away immediately. The legality of Jim's entrance into Colton's apartment when he discovered the body would be a big deal in court. On June 9, 2006, a pretrial hearing would settle this issue. If the judge ruled for the defense, then there wouldn't be much of a trial. If he ruled for the prosecution, then the defense would have a tough case. When Sharon took the stand, she conveyed that no one gave them permission to enter Colton's apartment, but he was the only link to finding her daughter. He was the last person to see Jennifer, and her car was parked outside his condo. Jim took the stand, and the prosecutor wanted to make a point. So he asked Jim what happened when he and Sharon called Colton's father, Eddie Petoniak, for help. Jim told the court that Eddie and his wife said Jennifer was the problem, not Colton. The courtroom went silent. They established that Colton's dad did not give them permission to enter the apartment. The prosecution put a detective on the stand to establish that if Jim hadn't entered the apartment, the police would have entered within a day or two, due to the smell of decomposing flesh, and would have been looking for Colton by August 21st. Colton was not found and deported until August 23rd. Jim entering Colton's apartment would not have changed those outcomes. Colton and his lawyers didn't really have a solid argument to counter the prosecution. A few weeks later, on August 4th, 2006, almost a year after Jennifer's death, the judge made a ruling. Jim's actions of breaking into Colton's condo were not due to receiving help or direction from the state. He had a legitimate reason to break into the apartment because it worried him that Jennifer was in danger. They set the murder trial for October 9th. Laura Hall received an email from a UT student named Matt on August 25th. He wanted to know if she helped Colton hack up that girl. She half-jokingly replied and told him to back off or she'd hack him up. After a few messages back and forth, she responded, "What does a hacksaw have to do with the death by gunshot? That girl was a whore. Besides, you asked if I helped. That would involve me confessing to something I did. Never ask that. Why are you asking me stuff that just makes me angry? Why are you doing this? Do you have a death wish? Where do you live, and who put you up to this? You read like a nice guy, Matt, but you're starting to piss me off." Laura Hall updated her Ashley Holiday profile on Facebook to say, "God is dead," under religious views. Her relationship status was complicated, and her activities said, living a double life. The prosecution was working hard to prepare for the trial, but couldn't come up with a motive for the case. They received results from the DNA analysis that showed Colton's blood and DNA were on the tools used to dismember Jennifer Cave. Colton's DNA was found on the gun that was used, but so was Laura Hall's. She did have an alibi and was staying over at a friend's house around the time frame of the murder. The defense wanted more time to do their own DNA analysis due to this new finding. They moved the trial date from October to January 22, 2007. That November, Laura Hall, a.k.a. Ashley Holiday, couldn't stay away from Facebook. Under activities, she typed, avoiding the APD and posting bond. Her favorite book was the entire criminal law section. She changed the About Me section to, don't fucking talk to me about Colton. If you have something stupid to say, you're not qualified to talk, and you never have made it through my door, and never will. F***ing die. I hope it hurts. The next day, she logged onto Facebook and wrote, I hate it when skanks think they're allowed to have dinner with my lovers. Colton Aaron Petoniak's trial began on Monday, January 22, 2007. Colton dressed in a gray suit and looked like the businessman he was supposed to become when he attended UT. They made opening statements, and the defense said this wasn't a whodunit. They said that Colton would testify, and that you would not hear from Laura Hall, but her DNA was on the gun. Colton could implicate others, but he would not do that. They were setting his defense up to be an accident, and that he wasn't guilty of murder. If anything, he was guilty of manslaughter. Defense attorney Roy Minton admitted his client didn't remember the details of that night because of drugs and alcohol. He trotted out Jennifer's history of job hopping and drug use to the jury. Jennifer used meth and smoked pot. One person who went out with Jennifer and Colton on that last night she was alive said Colton seemed as if his brain was fried on drugs. The defense drove home the point that Colton's brain wasn't working. Roy also tried to humanize Colton by calling him young man or boy, and often put his hand on his client's shoulder. Roy Minton had a grandfatherly way about him. During a courtroom break, Sharon was in the bathroom with an individual from the Victim's Assistance Office who had been assigned to help during the courtroom process. Bridget Petoniak rushed in and wanted to talk to Sharon. She wanted to tell her how sorry she was. Sharon ran into the bathroom stall because she did not want to deal with it. The victim's advocate stepped in, locked Bridget from the bathroom stall, and forced her to leave. When Sharon took the stand, the prosecution wanted to know about Colton's response to her pleading for information about her daughter. Dude, I'm having pizza with my friend. Don't bother me. When Sharon left the stand, she looked into Colton's eyes. They looked dead and were without an ounce of emotion. When Scott, Jennifer's ex-boyfriend, took the stand, the prosecution asked him about the message he left on Colton's phone the day Jennifer disappeared. Colton called him back, and when Scott told Colton that Jennifer's mother had called the police, Colton's response was, "That bitch is going to get me arrested." Colton was not winning many points with the jury. Sharon and her daughter Vanessa left the room when the crime scene photos were shown. Day one of the trial ended with the jurors seeing a picture of Colton's bathtub that contained Jennifer's body. Her head and hands were in a trash bag next to it. Day two was spent discussing DNA. Jim had to pull Sharon aside before the medical examiner testified. She was not yet aware of the bullet that was shot into Jennifer's head through her neck. Sharon felt like this nightmare was never ending. There was always some horrific finding waiting for her at every twist and turn. The medical examiner spent a significant amount of time on all the things that were done to Jennifer after death. Sharon and Vanessa left the room for the autopsy photos. Jim left too. The autopsy photos landed with the jury. Some jurors wept, and others covered their mouths in repulsion. A few jurors looked befuddled, as if they were struggling to envision a scenario where someone could be deranged enough to do this. The trial moved faster than the typical murder case because the defense did not have many questions on their cross-examinations. They admitted that their client killed the victim in the opening statement. On day 3, the lead detective took the stand to discuss the Burger King receipt and the significance of asking for a burger without onions. It showed a soundness of Colton's mind. He wasn't so high on drugs as to forget to order his food without onions. Jurors heard from the DNA and gun experts. The defense was interested in these two experts in particular, because Laura Hall's DNA was on the weapon, and that gun could have been accidentally discharged based on several factors. Jurors got to hear from Pedro Fernandez from the Casablanca Inn Hotel in Mexico. He spoke about how agitated Colton became in his home. The prosecution had no further witnesses. That afternoon, Laura Hall appeared in court with her lawyer to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights. The state did not offer her a deal or grant her immunity. It wasn't worth it for them, because she had given two wildly different statements to the police and wasn't credible. On day 4, 24-year-old Colton Petoniak got on the stand. Colton took the jury on a journey of his life story, from being a successful high school student to becoming a drug addict. The defense asked Colton if he and Jennifer had fallen in love with one another. Colton answered no to that question. The prosecution team was not aware that Colton told Jennifer that he loved her and had been rejected, and instead of accepting that rejection, he went after her with a knife. This would have given them the motive that they were desperately seeking. Colton told the jury that he started sleeping with Laura Hall in the spring of 2005. He knew she was in love with him, and he took advantage of that situation by having sex with her at least once a week. Colton denied owning a gun and said that it was left at his apartment from someone who had owed him money for drugs. He testified that he didn't remember the shooting, but he must have done it because there was no one else in the apartment when he woke up. He panicked and out of fear did not call 911. Instead, he called Laura Hall, who came up with a dismemberment plan. Colton claimed that he did not take part in the dismemberment because he didn't have the stomach for it. He also said that he did not fire the shot into Jennifer's severed head and could only assume Laura Hall did it because she was the only other person around the body. After lunch, it was the prosecution's turn with Colton. Attorney Bill Bishop asked Colton if he cultivated a gangster persona. When Colton said he did not do that, Bishop produced evidence from an internet forum where one of his handles was, "I love money and hoes." Colton explained that it was a joke. They established that Colton both took and sold drugs. Prosecution wanted the name of his suppliers and who he owed money to. Colton said that he didn't have specific names and was evasive. The prosecutor brought up an internet search, where Colton was up in the middle of the night looking for a silencer and a gun. Every question the prosecutor asked in relation to the night of Jennifer's death was met with a, "I don't know." Colton had Goodfellas listed as his favorite movie on Facebook. The prosecutor brought up the fact that the movie has a graphic scene with the dismemberment of a body. Colton said he didn't recall the details of the movie. Bishop kept pressing and reminded Colton that a large butcher knife and a machete were used to dismember a body in that movie. The prosecutor brought up The Sopranos, which Colton had on DVD. There was an episode where a body was moved to a bathtub and the head and hands were cut off. Colton said that he didn't recall that episode. Bishop wanted to know how many times he went to the bathroom on that morning Jennifer died. Colton said he probably went quite a few times. The prosecution was trying to show that Colton knew what Laura Hall was doing in that bathroom, and Colton was also taking part in the dismemberment. Bill Bishop pulled out all the stops and put up the crime scene photos for the next part of the questioning. Who put the cuts on Jennifer's chest? I don't know. Who put her hands in the bag? I don't know. Who put her head in the bag? I don't know. How long did it take to cut off her head? I don't know. And that was it. Prosecutor Bill Bishop was done with Colton Petoniak. On day 5, the defense called a man named Javier to the stand. He worked as a waiter at a Mexican restaurant where Laura used to work. Defense attorney Roy Minton asked Javier what Laura told him about the murder. He said Laura told him that she masterminded the escape and would have gotten away with it if it weren't for Laura's father. Javier said something which backfired on Colton's defense. Laura told him that she helped cut up a human body. The key word being helped. Colton owned up to using Laura for sex, but after Javier's testimony, it was clear he was using Hall to transfer some of the blame. The defense brought in an expert to talk about the impact of alcohol and Xanax on the brain. The doctor established that taking several tablets of Xanax per day and drinking a fifth of hard liquor can impair the memory or block it entirely. This wasn't new or shocking information for the courtroom attendees. On Monday, January 29, they gave the closing statements. The prosecution really emphasized the receipt from Burger King. Colton bought a saw to cut up his friend, and then he stopped at BK and had enough thoughtfulness to ask them to hold the onions. His testimony was full of inconsistencies, because his DNA was all over the things used to dismantle Jennifer Cave. The prosecution reiterated that the state doesn't have to prove a motive. They put the punctuation on the closing statement by showing the photo of Laura and Colton in Pedro's home in Mexico. They looked like they were worry-free and on vacation. There wasn't a motive for Colton to harm her, since Jennifer was his friend. The defense tried to counter with what happened to Jennifer after she died was disgusting, but to not confuse that with the way she died. The defense placed the responsibility of the condition of Jennifer's body and the escape to Mexico squarely on Laura Hall. When it was time for the jury to determine Colton's fate, the judge had taken manslaughter off the table because the evidence wasn't there, and the only charge that they were to consider was murder. Colton Aaron Petoniak was convicted on Monday, January 29, 2007, and the jury had arrived at a guilty verdict after an hour. Colton showed not a fleck of emotion when he learned his fate. The only thing the defense had left was to argue for a lighter sentence, but they lost that argument too. Colton received a 55-year sentence and would be eligible for parole when he was 51. When Jennifer's family left the courthouse, they were met by the media. Vanessa spoke for the Cave family. Colton got what he deserved. Jennifer was one of the best people you could ever meet. She cared for the world. Prosecutor Bishop's work was not done. After Colton's case, it was evident that Laura Hall had played a larger role, and they wanted to lay additional charges on her. The prosecution charged her with another third-degree felony for hindering apprehension and tampering with evidence, which was directly related to the dismemberment of Jennifer's body. After the trial, Sharon tried to move on with her life and wanted to help others who have gone through similar experiences. She worked on the Jennifer Cave Act with her local representatives. Rick Perry signed it into law on July 12, 2007. The desecration of a corpse had been a misdemeanor, and this new law made it a second-degree felony. The second initiative Sharon worked on was to give jurors state-provided post-trial counseling when they sat through court proceedings with terrible crimes. Sharon was compassionate and saw the toll that her daughter's murder trial took on the jurors. She witnessed their tears and distress, even when she was busy trying to manage her own emotions in the courtroom. Even though Laura Hall had graduated from UT, she tried taking jobs under her middle name, Ashley. When her employers realized that she was the Laura Ashley Hall, they immediately fired her. For a woman who was in serious legal trouble, Laura seemed to enjoy all the media attention. Laura's defense attorney was worried about putting her on the stand. He hired a psychologist to do an assessment. It confirmed his worries when the psychologist recommended keeping her off the stand. The prosecutor dangled a deal in front of Laura. She could plead to either felony and get only 6 years. Laura's attorney wanted to negotiate with the prosecutor and possibly get her time reduced to 4 years. Hall rejected the offer. She wanted to go to law school, and if she had a felony on her record, that would not be a career path open to her. Right before Laura's trial was about to start, her dad hired a new lawyer. This was the same lawyer who represented one of the individuals charged with murder in the 1991 Austin yogurt shop murders, Joe James Sawyer. Sawyer's pedigree differed from Laura's court-appointed attorney. He was known to be a gladiator in the courtroom. Laura's father wasn't a wealthy man, but was planning to write a book arguing his daughter's innocence, which would help pay for her defense. The judge issued a gag order for the trial, which killed his book plans. The second day of Laura Hall's trial was on August 28, 2007, which also marked her 24th birthday. The defense made their opening statements. Laura Hall was a willing party in the cover-up and escape. Then the defense said something that had not been heard or considered before. Colton fantasized about murder. He wanted to kill and defile a person in real life. From the defense attorney's perspective, There were 2 female victims, Jennifer Cave and Laura Ashley Hall. The defense jumped on what Jennifer Cave had uttered at the bars on the last night she was alive. She had told her friend Melissa that Colton was crazy. It was also finally revealed that Colton threatened Jennifer with a knife when she rejected his romantic advances. Another unfortunate fact about Laura's trial was that Jim and Sharon had to get on the stand again and re-explain the worst day of their lives to everyone in the courtroom. Much like Colton, Laura showed no emotion during the trial, which did not garner her any support. This new jury had to see all the terrible crime scene photos, which drove home the true depravity and cruelty of this case. The jurors were reminded that Laura's DNA was found on the flip-flops from the bathroom, on the shop towel that was purchased from the hardware store, and on the gun and its magazine. If Laura's DNA was found on the flip-flops from the bathroom, it meant that she, at a minimum, knew that Jennifer Cave was dead. The defense attorney tried to make a point that the wounds on Jennifer's hand could have been defensive wounds from trying to grab or block Colton's knife. Even though Vanessa and Sharon had a victim's advocate block the restroom when they used it, Laura Hall pushed right past them. Vanessa took a protective stance and stood in front of the stall that her mother was in. Hall showed a lack of decorum and decency when she said, "There was no law that says we can't use the public restroom." If Laura's defense lawyer was trying to convince everyone that she was a helpless woman who was easily victimized, she was not showing that outside of the courtroom. Some media started calling her the Ice Princess. Many of the witnesses that testified really helped the jury understand that Hall was not taken against her will to Mexico. The photo of Laura and Colton at Pedro's home looked like a vacation photo and didn't support her claim that she was taken against her will. When she was in the Border Patrol's office waiting for her dad to pick her up, she said that she would kill anybody who hurt Colton. Henrietta Langenbach, Laura's cellmate, was called to the stand and recounted what Laura told her about Jennifer Cave. She was a nothing. She was a nobody. Just a fucking waitress hoe. The 6 days she spent with Colton were the happiest of her life. How many grandmothers can tell their grandchildren they cut up a human body? Laura's attorney tried to defame Henrietta's character and reminded the jury that she was in jail for fraud. However, her testimony was similar to all the other people who had encountered Laura Hall. They also tried to play Henrietta off as a jailhouse snitch, even though she received nothing for her testimony. And she had asked for nothing for her testimony, because she was there to do the right thing for Jennifer. Laura did not testify at her trial, which only lasted 3 days. The jury began deliberating right before 3 p.m. on Thursday, and they did not reach a decision until 4:40 p.m. the next day. Defense attorney Joe Sawyer argued for a lesser charge of misdemeanor to be an option. The judge agreed and put that on the table for the jury. This worried Sharon. She desperately wanted a felony on Laura Hall's record so she could not become a lawyer. When the jury read the verdict, Laura was found not guilty on the felony charge of hindering apprehension, and instead was found guilty on the misdemeanor charge of hindering apprehension. Her defense attorney's argument was that the warrant wasn't signed at the time Laura crossed the border to Mexico, and the jury agreed with that. They did find her guilty on felony tampering with evidence. They sentenced Laura to 1 year for the misdemeanor hindering charge and 5 years for the felony tampering. This wasn't the end of Laura Hall's courtroom story. They released her from jail in 2009, after the appeals court ruled that her sentencing wasn't fair, and she was entitled to a new hearing. Laura told a cab driver that her boyfriend was accused of murder. When the cab driver wanted to know who he was accused of killing, she told him, "Some bitch." The cab driver couldn't pick her out of the investigator's photo lineup. This information was never passed on to Laura's attorney, which was a Brady violation. Prosecutor Bill Bishop said it was an honest mistake and was not a pattern of misconduct on his part. In 2010, Laura was resentenced to the maximum 10 years and got credit for the 2 years already served. Laura made many jailhouse calls that showed a lack of remorse. Some were even threatening to Jennifer's family. They played the audio in the courtroom, and it didn't sit well with the jury.
She's just mad because I'm not dead.
Right, she's mad because
She's a psychopath.
she's mad because I have a daughter and you're not dead. She doesn't have a daughter. And
Yes, but she's jealous.
They had an interview with that girl's mother again. What's her name?
She's going down. She's going down, one way or another.
Colton Petoniak appealed his verdict in December 2017. He claimed to have 2 witnesses that could dispute the state's timeline of Jennifer's death. Colton had a previous appeal that said Laura Hall confessed to killing Jennifer when she served time in jail. All his appeals have been denied. They released Laura Hall from prison on March 15, 2018, which was 5 months shy of her 10-year sentence. She is not allowed to contact Jennifer's family. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for links to the sources used in this episode. I just want to say I'm really glad I read the book called A Descent into Hell, the true story of an altar boy, a cheerleader, and a twisted Texas murder by Catherine Casey, who's an excellent writer. It helped fill in the gaps in this case, and it's where I got some of the information about Laura Hall's social media posts. The writer also seemed to have a close relationship with Jennifer's family, so you get a real sense of who Jennifer was. There are also court transcripts floating around that have some pretty interesting social media activity for Laura Hall. If you enjoy the show, you can support me by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or by sharing this episode on social media. I'm also on Patreon, patreon.com/Beyond Contempt Podcast. I would like to thank the Invisible Choir podcast for supporting me on Patreon at the $3 level. Please give them a download and a listen, because they have a fantastic show. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll talk to you in a few weeks.